We arrived at Arlen Narrowboats at Ashton Basin, Tolkeith Brow, Preston around 2 p.m. After unloading our gear and saying hello to Tony and Jill, the owners of the boatyard, we drove down to Preston Docks to pick up some groceries and have lunch at Morrison's. It was exactly 9 years ago that we cruised the Lanky aboard narrowboat Heron. We were surprised to find her in as good or even better condition than she was in 1999. We pulled out of Ashton Basin around 4 p.m. under bright skies, but as you can see from my attire, it was a little bit on the chilly side. The Preston to Tuet Field section of the canal was opened in 1799, and the northern section to Kendal in 1826. The latter part was closed to navigation in 1968. The area around Preston has been cleaned up quite a lot since our previous cruise. And here's a good example of why I say that. It didn't take me long to have my first mishap. The canal guide went for a swim. Fortunately, it was laminated and didn't sink. Our first stop was the upper basin of the Ribble Link. It connects with the canal about 1.5 miles from Preston. The 4-mile link was opened in 2002 and connects the once isolated Lancaster Canal with the main navigable system via the canalisation of Savick Brook. The link runs around the outskirts of Preston and flows into the River Ribble. From there it uses the River Douglas to connect with the Leeds and Liverpool Canal's Rufford branch. Savick Brook was widened to allow boats with a 10-foot 6 beam. The link descends about 59 feet by means of a staircase of 3 locks, 4 conventional locks, 1 lock which is semi-tidal at its low end, and a rotating sector gate which is only passable around high tide. No, we didn't go down the link. In fact, hire boats are not allowed on it. As a point of interest, we had planned on doing the link in April of 2004 on narrowboat Ursula, but we cancelled because of predicted spring tides on the river. Back on the main line, heading north, and time for an afternoon beer. We moored up for our first night just beyond Salwick Hall by bridge number 26. It's difficult to get close into the bank because the Lanky was constructed with sloping sides. After we got the gangplank set up, we headed off to the Hand and Dagger. We decided not to eat at the pub because we'd had a late lunch in Preston. After a pint or two, we went back on board and had a delicious bread and jam dinner. Wakey, wakey, Pat. It's Sunday the 20th. After breakfast, we cruised for about 2 hours to Old Nell's Tavern in Billsborough. The tavern's part of Guy's Thatched Hamlet, a family-owned tourist attraction. We had Sunday dinner there, but the food was mediocre at best. In the afternoon, we had a stroll around the hamlet. Back on board, we had a problem with the television and called Arlen Narrowboats. We stayed at Old Nell's and waited for Tony to arrive with a replacement TV. The weather didn't look that promising, so we stayed at the tavern mooring for the night. Heron has a double bed at the stern, but we tried out the forward make-up bed. It was like a king-size bed and we could watch the telly. This is a nighttime shot from the stern. It was a bright sunny morning on Monday the 21st, and after a nice big fry-up breakfast we got underway. As the sign says, we're crossing Brook Aqueduct. There were originally 22 aqueducts on the canal, all designed and built by John Rennie. One has since been destroyed and another replaced. What makes them especially interesting is that no two of them are alike. Brook Aqueduct is the first major river crossing since leaving Preston and is definitely worth a look at. The canal builders were forced to lower the level of the river in order to build an aqueduct of sufficient strength, and they also had to construct a weir on the upstream side. On the approach to Catterall, the canal passes through a pleasant wooded stretch. I know it's a no-no, but I just had to pick a nice bunch of daffodils and bluebells for Pat. Now, don't they look nice on our table? It's always a challenge to get by the herons without them flying off, but I made it past this one. We spent the night in this lay-by in 1999 and had to pull in for a stroll down memory lane. Our swing was still there, but it was a little harder for Pat to get on it. But she finally made it. Of course, I had to show off and show how easy it was. After having a swinging time, we went for a stroll through the bluebell woods. We nearly trod on these duck eggs. It's time to get back on board Narrowboat Heron and continue on our way. Calder Aqueduct is another example of a river having been lowered to accommodate the canal. On the approach to Garstang, the canal crosses the River Wyre on a majestic single-arch aqueduct with the river 30 feet below. The best view of the aqueduct is from the towpath running along the riverbank. We arrived at the market town of Garstang around noon. After doing a little bit of shopping, we had a pint at the Royal Oak Hotel before returning to the boat. It was a lovely afternoon as we cruised the 5 miles to just beyond Stony Lane Bridge. Pat did a bit of laundry before fixing supper. It was a nice bright sunny morning on Tuesday, so I decided to get an early start. It's difficult to see in this photo, but Stony Lane Bridge is railed because during World War II the parapet was taken down so that the enemy troops could be seen crossing it. Of course, the enemy never made it to England. Well, I guess only one of us decided to get an early start. We started our morning cruise around 7 AM. This is a shot of typical Lancashire farmland country around the village of Cockerham. There are quite a few of these cuttings through canal-side woodlands. Most of them were originally planted with larch to provide timber for the canal-related works. This is approaching Hay Car Bridge. It's near the sparsely populated hamlet of Bay Horse. And as you can see, we are now 6 miles from Lancaster. This is the impressive Ellel Grange. It was built in 1860 and it's a copy of Queen Victoria's Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. Today it's a non-denominational healing retreat. And it's appropriate that the Grange should have a more ornate bridge than the others that cross the canal. By 9 o'clock we'd reached the junction with the Glasson Arm. We stopped to take a couple of photographs but decided to do this arm on our return journey. I'll tell you more about the arm later on. Brentbrick Bridge is at the southern end of an area called Burrows Heights Cutting. It's also known as Deep Cutting. The canal was cut through glacial deposits in order to avoid a long detour. The cutting is 30 foot deep in parts and 1.5 miles long. Can you see the deer peeping out from behind the tree in the centre of the photo? By 11 o'clock we began our cruise through the historic city of Lancaster. Many of its canal-side mills have been converted to offices and homes. We had planned on having a lunchtime pint at the Waterwitch pub, but it was closed for renovation. As it was such a nice day, we decided to push on and visit the city on our way back. On leaving the city, you cruise along an embankment with excellent views of the castle and priory on the hill. The canal winds through woodlands for a mile or so and then makes a sharp turn to the west. At this point the canal crosses Rennie's masterpiece, the Loon Aqueduct. It was formally opened in 1797 and took 5 years to build at a cost of £48,000. It stands on wooden piles driven 20 feet under the riverbed, and it's 51 feet above the river and 660 feet long. It was built with local stone and is considered to be one of the most beautiful aqueducts in the country. In my opinion, the scenery from here to the terminus at Tuart Field rivals any on the UK canal system. Okay, I have to admit that the M6 motorway spoils it in a couple of places. This is northern Lancashire at its best. By 4:20 we cruised through the unsport village of Borwick and we were nearing the terminus. Even though we took it very slow, we made the 42-mile journey from Preston to Tuart Field in 3 days. The canal ended here until the section to Kendal was opened in 1819. Sadly, it again became the terminus in 1968 with the building of the M6 motorway. This is the bottom lock of the Tuart Field 8 on the non-navigable northern reaches. Although it looks so serene in this photo, to me it looks so sad to be severed from the rest of its canal. The 8 locks lifted the canal 75 feet over a distance of 3/4 of a mile, and were the only locks on the 57-mile main line from Kendal to Preston. There is a 3-phased approach to reopening the northern section, but the 2002 estimate cost of £60 million has yet to be funded. It will be a while before you can cruise from Preston to Kendal. Although this looks like an ideal spot to tie off for the day, there was one little problem. The M6 was only a few yards away and the noise of the traffic was deafening. We decided to begin our return journey and find a nicer spot to spend the evening. Not only does the M6 blight Tuart Field, but there's a project underway to build 63 holiday homes and a marina for 54 boats at the terminus. For your information, the asking price on a 3-bedroom townhouse is £329,950. About a mile from Tuart Field we found a nice mooring spot in open country. This was just beyond Borwick near Hodgson's Bridge. We settled down to a nice supper of steak and kidney pie, parsnips, carrots and potatoes. It was yummy and the wine was a perfect complement. By 7 p.m. the weather had changed for the worse. It's Wednesday the 23rd and Pat cleans up the breakfast dishes while I check the weather forecast on the telly. Hey, where's my breakfast? The rain had quit and it looks like we're in for another nice day. Okay Pat, get back on board and let's get going. We went all of a 1/4 of a mile before we pulled into Carpenray Canal Arm, which is locally known as Lovers Creek. The arm took barges into Webber Quarry where they were loaded with limestone. The landing platform is new since we moored here in 1999. There are some nice walks around the quarry woods and along the canal bank, and this is where we came across this mammoth swan. However, not too far away is a large caravan park. Pat was feeling fairly good, so we went for an afternoon stroll across the fields to Borwick. I think you can see why I love this part of England. This is looking down on where we moored last night. Peace and tranquility. Okay, the 3 of you, pose for the camera. This shot and the next 5 will show you how we walked in style, pun intended. I think some of these are going to be a tight squeeze. Ain't that right, Pat? Now this one will be a challenge. No way. See, John? I told you I could make it. It was about a 1.5 mile stroll across fields and over stiles from our mooring to the hamlet of Borwick. It has no shops, not even a pub. But it did win the Lancashire Village of the Year competition in 2007. Although we were not supposed to, we had a look around the grounds of Borwick Hall. It was built as a residence in the late 16th century, and since 1970 it's been an outdoor activity centre for the Lancashire County Council. It was featured in the children's TV programme The Ghosts of Motley Hall. We walked back on the towpath side of the canal, and I said to Pat that I'd cross over the nearby railway bridge, get to the boat and pick her up. I ended up having to walk along the tracks with a high fence for at least a mile before I could find an opening into the fields. I didn't realise all I had to do was go under the bridge to get back to the boat. Anyway, after a lot of huffing and puffing, I finally made it, picked up Pat, and we got underway. This is the railway viaduct near Carpenray. It was a nice evening for cruising, so we decided not to make a stop at Carnforth. We ended up mooring outside the Royal Hotel in Bolton-le-Sands and ate on board. We had baked beans on toast with an egg on top. Of course, we did visit the pub after supper for a couple of pints, and we watched the Manchester United versus Barcelona football match. It ended in a 0-0 draw. Tuesday the 24th started off sunny, but by the time we got to Haltech Swing Bridge it had started to drizzle. This is the only swing bridge I found where you can go through easily single-handed. First you cross over the bridge to unhook it, then back on the towpath side you push it open. As you can see, there's a chain attached to the bridge. Of course I could have got back on board and steered through, but I wanted to get my morning exercise. To close the bridge you just pull on the chain. The final step's to put the hook back on so the bridge won't swing open on its own. By 9:30 the sun had started to break through as we moored up in Hest Bank. The canal is only a few hundred yards from the high water mark of Morecambe Bay at Hest Bank. Heed the sign. In 2004, 23 Chinese cockle pickers were trapped by a fast rising tide and lost their lives in this bay. As you can see, the tide was out, so we went for a nice walk along the shoreline. Definitely not your usual sandy beach. It was nice walking on the soft grass, but I wouldn't fancy doing it when the tide's in. We started our beach stroll on the far side of the White House. We popped into the Hest Bank for a lunchtime pint before returning to Narrowboat Heron. By 2 o'clock, Pat was taking us back over the Loon Aqueduct and into Lancaster. St. Peter's Cathedral looms over the canal as you enter the centre of the city. We had thought about visiting the castle, but Pat was getting worn out walking around Market Gate, so we gave it a pass. It was a beautiful evening as we left Lancaster and cruised through Burrows Heights. The next few slides will give you some idea of what it's like. This was the view from our kitchen window, and dinner tonight was bangers and spaghetti. It's now Friday the 25th. We'd worked our schedule out so that our friends Graham and Lynn could leave their car at Cowgate over the weekend and cruise the Glass and Arm with us. However, Graham called last night to let us know that they wouldn't be joining us. Here's Pat making the turn onto the Glass and Arm, or more correctly, the Glass and Dock Arm. It was opened in 1826 to provide a link to the sea. Perfect! The arm is 2 miles and 5 furlongs in length and has a flight of 6 locks plus a sea lock at the basin. The total fall from Gowgate to the dock is 58 feet 3 inches. The bottom gate paddle is unusual. It uses a rack and pinion mechanism to move the paddle side to side over the sluices instead of the more usual vertical paddles. Water enters the locks by means of sluices set into the masonry. I wonder if British Waterways still have the lock and bridge competition. Pat did a good job of bringing Heron into the first lock. Some of the paddles were a bit stubborn. Maybe that's because they get harder as the years roll by. Overall, I have to say that the locks are well maintained. 3 down, 3 to go. On our left is the small hamlet of Thurman, with the spire of St. Thomas and St. Elizabeth Church peeping over the treetops. Formerly a 16th century grain mill and until recently known as Thurman Mill, this is now part of the Mitchell Hotel chain. It was only 11 AM and a little early to stop for a pint. Most of the arm goes through rural farm and pasture lands of the Condor Valley. By 11:30 we had reached our destination, Glasson Basin. The first order of business was to find a mooring, so we took a trip around the basin. The wind started to blow and it got a little choppy. There were not many places to moor, but we found this spot that was really close to the village. The skipper of the yacht Intrepid seemed a little anxious as we pulled in, but he came over and gave us a helping hand to tie off. And we made it just in time before the rains came. Glasson Dock was built in 1787 due to the difficulty of navigation up the River Lune to the docks at Lancaster. A shipyard and custom house were built in 1834, a watch house in 1836 and a dry dock in 1841. The shipyards were largely concerned with ship repair rather than shipbuilding. Eventually they closed in 1968. Today a limited amount of commercial traffic still uses the dock with outbound shipments including coal for the Isle of Man and the Western Isles of Scotland, and incoming cargoes including animal foodstuffs and fertilizers which are stored in the sheds located at the dockside. Here we have some swans on the River Lune, and here we have an expert lawn bowler. While on our short tour of Glasson we found the Dalton Arms. And it goes without saying, we popped in for a pint. Next we decided to try the Victoria Inn. Even though this notice is dated 1786, this pub was not built until the 1830s. We ended up having dinner there. They had fish and chips on a special, but it had all gone, so we had to settle for pie and chips. It started off being a bright and sunny morning on Saturday the 26th, so I went for a morning walk. Just a couple of shots of some seagoing vessels. Talk about a small fish in a big pond. The primroses were out in bloom. This is the village's church. It's called Christ Church. The doors were locked, so I didn't get to look inside. As we were in no rush to leave, I went for a longer walk along the banks of the River Lune. I guess I went for a couple of miles before heading back. I was back on board by 8 o'clock, but it was looking a little unsettled, so we took off after breakfast. As it turned out, it was a nice sunny morning as we made our way back up the arm. I enjoyed doing a little bit of single-handed cruising as I took Heron up the 6 locks. Here's Mama and Papa Swan getting ready to start their family. This is a pillbox. It's a World War II military bunker. We made it back to the main line by 11 AM. Would you believe it if I said that I bow-hauled Heron all the way? I guess not. and that's obvious because Pat did her fair share of bow hauling. After leaving the Arm, we went north to Cowgate, where we watered up. We went into the village for a lunchtime pint at the New Inn and watched Manchester United lose 2-1 to Chelsea. We returned to the boat about 3 p.m. and started heading back down south. Hey, I remember that boat. It was here 6 days ago. Let's get out of here. I guess we just can't get away from it. Yes, we ended back at Stony Lane Bridge, where we moored on Monday night. Now you can see those railings I was talking about. We revisited Garstang on Sunday. This time it was in search of a place to have a nice Sunday dinner. We decided on the Wheat Sheaf. There's Pat at it again, this time with 2 pints. The meal was better than last Sunday's, but they didn't serve Yorkshire pudding with their roast dinner. We thought that we'd have seen more ducklings and cygnets. I guess we were a little early. This is not a very good shot of the ruins of Greenhull Castle. It was built by the Earl of Derby in 1490. By the second week the bluebells had really started to come out. It's always fun to check out boat names and paintwork as you cruise along. There's a picture of this one in the canal guide. Monday the 28th. Oh no, it looks like we're in for some bad weather. Actually, this was the only time I had to put on the yellows. It did drizzle and rain most of the morning, but it wasn't too bad. Now, what have we here? A gun-goozling Lancashire wild animal that likes to look at narrowboats. There are quite a few Tupperware boats on the Lanky, and this one should definitely be removed. Here are some future moorhens, or are they coots? Around noon we moored up at Harrison's Bridge on Lee Lane and walked into the Smith's Arms in Lee Town for lunch. We split a plate of fish and chips and Pat had white onion soup. It was okay. In the afternoon we cruised down to Savick Aqueduct and moored up for our last night aboard narrowboat Heron. We were just a couple of yards from Haslam Park, which borders the canal. It's Tuesday the 29th of April, and after breakfast we went for a short walk around the park. You can just make out narrowboat Heron moored on top of the aqueduct. Just like we used to on narrowboat Ursula, we gave narrowboat Heron a thorough cleaning before setting off. It was just a short cruise back to Ashton Basin. It's 8:30 and we're making the turn into the basin. Tony had said that there was no need to get back on time, but we wanted to get an early start for our drive up to Westmoreland. Tony and Jill were definitely not expecting us for some time. I had to keep banging on the door of their boat to wake them up. Anyway, after we got the boat unloaded, we chatted with them for a while, and as we were getting ready to leave, they very kindly gave us a couple of Arlen Narrowboats shirts. That was really nice of them.